Artreach presents ENCORE at Home, Enhancing Accessible Experiences in Arts and Culture, featuring Eastern State Penitentiary.
Hello everyone, my name is Tom. I'm a tour guide at Eastern State Penitentiary Historic Site, and today I'm going to tell you the story of our most famous prisoner, the gangster Al Capone. To begin our story, let us start with a brief introduction to America's most historic prison. Eastern State Penitentiary opened in 1829 with the idea that through the use of solitary confinement, or total isolation, people would become penitent, show sincere remorse for their crime, and eventually be rehabilitated. The prison was open for 142 years and imprisoned over 80,000 people. Of those 80,000, Al Capone was certainly the most infamous. Capone was brought to Eastern State on August 8, 1929. Described by prison officials upon admission as being a 5'9" stocky man with black hair, dark olive skin complexion, and with significant scarring on the left side of his face. Often referred to as a ruthless crime boss, Al Capone was a very wealthy man, worth several $1 million, which would be about $1 billion today. He was active during an era known as Prohibition. Going into effect in 1920, the National Prohibition Act was a new amendment to the U.S. Constitution that prohibited the consumption and manufacture of alcohol nationwide. The amendment, however, led to a rise in crime, specifically bootlegging, or the illegal transportation of alcoholic beverages. This became a very lucrative business and made those involved very wealthy. One of the largest groups of people to benefit from this crime were members of organized crime syndicates known as gangsters. Al Capone was a member of the Italian Mafia in Chicago, Illinois. Though some consider Capone a vicious criminal, many also viewed him as a celebrity. He leaned into his celebrity status by socializing with the press and having his picture taken. On the other hand, police and other law enforcement agents worked tirelessly to find evidence of Capone's crimes and corruption, but they were ultimately unsuccessful. On May 16, 1929, Al Capone was traveling through Philadelphia after attending a conference in Atlantic City, New Jersey. This was no ordinary conference. It was, in fact, a gathering of the most powerful gangsters in the United States. Over the course of a long weekend, these folks met to discuss their business arrangements and the future of Prohibition. When the conference concluded, Capone began to make his way home to Chicago. In those days, trains were the quickest way to travel, and in order to catch the right train, Capone had to drive to Philadelphia. Unfortunately for him, his car broke down and he missed his train. To pass his time in Philadelphia, Capone and his bodyguard, Frank Klein, went to see a movie in Center City. He was recognized by members of the public as he entered the theater, and the police were notified shortly thereafter. When the two men exited the theater, they were approached and searched by police detectives. Both men were discovered to be carrying unlicensed .38 caliber revolvers and were promptly arrested. Within 24 hours, Capone was sentenced to 1 year in prison, the maximum penalty for that crime. He was first sent to the county prison at Holmesburg, not too far from Eastern State, which is where he was later transferred 2 months later due to security concerns. The actual appearance of Capone's cell is open to interpretation, as there are no existing photographs of the space while he lived there. The historic site does know that Capone's cell was located in an area often referred to by prisoners and guards as Park Avenue. Here's a picture of the historic site's current interpretation of Al Capone's cell. Inside the cell at the far end are 2 single beds with metal frames, mattresses with sheets, 1 pillow, and a folded gray blanket. Between the 2 beds is a small old-fashioned wooden radio player with a lamp and picture on top. In the foreground, there is a wooden hutch that has shelves on the top and the bottom. The top shelves are filled with several books and what looks to be a picture frame. The bottom of the hutch opens into a small writing desk where there is a metal desk lamp, some paper, and some more books. This is where there is also a wooden chair with a gray cushion partially concealed under the desk. Next to the hutch is a small metal smoking stand, on top of which is a small white plate and cigar. Directly across from the hutch is a small, thin square nightstand with a blue-green vase holding a large bouquet of yellow and green flowers. The cell walls are cream-colored and adorned with hanging picture frames and paintings. There are conflicting accounts about the possibility of Capone receiving special treatment whilst in prison at Eastern State. One account, pictured here, published in the Philadelphia Public Ledger, describes the cell as luxurious, and that even Capone said he was very comfortable with his accommodations. However, An article published the next day by the Philadelphia Record presents a different story. The Record article, pictured here, states that Capone had a cellmate and that his cell was by no means the most luxuriously furnished cell in the prison, that there were others that were more sumptuous. The penitentiary records also indicate that many prisoners were able to buy the same amenities as Al Capone and even painted murals on their cell walls. This ultimately leaves Capone's treatment up for your interpretation. By all accounts, Capone was a model prisoner during his incarceration, and after a series of appeals, Capone was granted early release in 1930 after serving 7 months at Eastern State. Capone was released on March 17, 1930, but not directly from Eastern State. His celebrity status had raised concerns from prison officials, and they feared that a large crowd could gather at the prison, which could be a security problem. On the night of March 16th, Capone and Frank Klein were transferred to Graterford Penitentiary, Eastern State's farm branch, located just outside of the city, and they were quietly released from there the next day. As it turns out, prison officials were right. A large crowd did gather outside of Eastern State, though none were the wiser that Capone was already on his way back to Chicago, where he would continue business as usual. Capone's imprisonment at Eastern State signaled the beginning of the end of the famous gangster. In 1931, he was arrested for federal income tax evasion and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. This eventually led him to Alcatraz Island. After years of sickness and mental health issues whilst imprisoned, Capone was compassionately released from Alcatraz and retired to his home in Miami, Florida. In 1947, at the age of 48, Al Capone passed away at his home from pneumonia and cardiac arrest, both of which were complications of advanced neurosyphilis.
Support by Independence Public Media Foundation. ASL interpretation by Hands Up Productions. Special thanks to Tom from Eastern State Penitentiary, our deaf talent James Caverly, and the Virginia and Harvey Kimmel Family Education Fund. Learn more at www.art-reach.org.